more of their father than they do of you.
That's as it should be.
Well, don't you care?
Practically perfect people never permit sentiment to muddle their thinking.
Is that so? Well, I'll tell you one thing, Mary Poppins. You don't fool me a bit.
Oh, really?
Yes, Mary. I know exactly how you feel about these children, and if you think I'm going to keep my mouth shut any longer,
That will be quite enough of that, thank you.
Goodbye, Mary Poppins. Don't stay away too long.
That was magic. She flies in to be of help to the Banks family, who they're lovely people, and they're not loving each other very well. And she spends time with them, and wondrous things happen. And by the end of the movie, Mom and Dad are getting along again. The kids are getting along with each other and with Mom and Dad. They've all learned to love each other again, learned to love life again. So her work is done. So it's time for her to leave. And at the very end of the movie, the Banks family goes out and does what? They fly kites. Yeah, and as they're having fun together flying a kite, I love that the Banks family kite, the tail on it is a part of a banner from the women's suffragette movement. This is all going to make you want to go back and look at the movie again. So they're all out flying kites. And Mary Poppins, you saw that little moment where she got a tear in her eye. She's kind of saying goodbye. And then she floats off into the sky. And they don't see her again. But she's left something of her spirit with them. So did you ever think about Mary Poppins as a Jesus figure? She kind of is. She comes in, teaches the way of life and love, and when her mission has been completed, she leaves. And everyone else in the story has to carry on living out the message that she's taught them. But it's a goodbye. The end of the movie is a goodbye. All the scripture stories we heard this morning, team read by Janet and Eleanor, because there's a lot of words, a lot to read. They were all goodbye stories. First one about Elisha and Elijah. Elisha, or Elisha, however you say it, was a student of Elijah, a prophet of ancient Israel. Now, in those days, the prophets were kind of like traveling monks. They wandered around the country, teaching about God, settling religious disputes, and most importantly, reminding the people of Israel they were meant to follow God's ways. Now, some of them, like Elijah, seem to have almost Mary Poppins-like abilities. Special things they could do. They could heal people. They could help them. Some of what they did seemed like magic. When Elisha heard that his teacher Elijah was going to leave him, he asked for a double portion of his spirit. He wanted Elijah's blessing, but I think more than anything, he wanted to know that God would still be with him, even though his teacher was leaving. So Elijah was a miracle worker. In this story, he needs to cross the Jordan River. He takes off his cloak, also called a mantle, rolls it up, and uses it to smack the water of the Jordan River. And the river divides right and left, and they walk across the dry bed of the river. Does that sound familiar? Have you heard some of that story before? Does it make you think about Moses? You know, Moses, he's leading the Israelites out of slavery. They're being pursued by the Egyptian soldiers who want to take them back to return them to slave labor. Moses holds up his staff, and the waters of the Red Sea are parted right and left. The Israelites walk the dry bed of the sea. And as they get to the other side and the Egyptian armies are pursuing them, Moses lifts the staff again. The waters crash down. No more Egyptians. No more horses, no more chariots, no more army. They're all wiped out, freeing the escaped slaves to continue their journey towards a promised land. Story says it took 40 years to find it. No GPS. They spent their time wandering in the wilderness, learning how to be a new nation. After 40 years in the wilderness, the Israelites are about to cross the Jordan River. Across the river is the promised land. Moses stands on the bank. Banks. Interesting. Moses stands on the bank of the river and says, well, hope it goes well for you. But I won't be joining you. My journey ends here. And he appoints his successor, Joshua, gives Joshua a blessing, gives the people a blessing, and then Moses dies. Powerful symbols from those stories have made their way into our culture. Ever hear somebody talk about dying as crossing over? In the old days, a groom might carry a bride over the threshold, through a doorway, symbolizing the transition from one way of life to a new way of life. In many books in literature, crossing a body of water is a symbol of a new start. And you'll often see this in movies too. When the hero's journey begins, they'll often show the hero crossing a bridge. Whether they're driving or on a bus or walking or on a horse, they'll cross a bridge. And that's a symbol they're headed to a new place, a new life. Often it's an act of courage just to cross the bridge. Maybe it's a bridge over troubled water. Hopefully it's a fresh start. And around here in church, we use water to baptize people. Water has the power of life and death. We can't live without water. We use it to clean, to refresh ourselves. At the beginning of the day, we splash water on our faces to help us wake up. When someone we love dies, tears, salty water streams down our face. I've been talking this weekend with my friend Margaret. Margaret is recovering from the very recent ordeal of losing her husband to cancer. And it all happened so quick. Just when she was absorbing the news that he was very ill, they learned things were progressing far quicker than they had expected. And within just a few weeks, her husband Don had died. Now Margaret's doing the best she knows how, with help, to carry on. She has 2 new grandbabies. Her career is going well. She has good friends, lots to keep her busy. She told me yesterday morning that her weekends are the hardest because she doesn't know how to be alone in her house. Wasn't ready for that. Right now, this is just so poignant. She said she cannot ever imagine being happy again. We don't always welcome change, and we certainly do not relish when loss comes. It's painful when a loved one dies, even when that death is also a release from terrible pain, suffering, more and more hardship. It's still hard. So Elisha, faced not only the death of his friend, but the end of his time as a student, learning the holy ways. With the death of his mentor, he also has to figure out whether he's going to carry on Elijah's prophetic work. So Elisha's there, and he watches as Elijah is carried off into heaven in a whirlwind. And he sees a chariot of fire, pulled by horses of fire. We have no earthly idea what that's all about. What does any of that mean? But we do know that Elijah was gone. And somehow all that was left behind was his cloak. Elisha picks up the cloak. The cloak or the mantle becomes a symbol of leadership, of mission. It's It's a bit like the superhero putting the cape on before they go out and fight crime. The last image in that story we heard is Elisha taking the cloak, smacking the water, once again dividing the waters right and left so he can walk across dry land, go on with his mission. We also got, because Eleanor read first, we also got to hear two versions of the story of Jesus' goodbye day. Just like Moses didn't get to enter the promised land, Jesus would no longer be with his disciples as they moved on. But Jesus said they would be clothed with power from on high. Sounds like a cloak or a mantle, like the one Elisha got from his teacher. So in the ascension story that Eleanor read from Acts, after Jesus disappears into the sky, the disciples suddenly see two men dressed in white standing beside them. The strangers ask, "Why are you standing here looking up in the sky?" You ever do that? Ever go to a park or a city street and look up and see who else will look up too? I guess they do psychology experiments like that to see who will look up. How many looked up when I did it? That story of two men appearing out of nowhere and saying, "So why are you just standing here?" Does that sound familiar? You heard a story like that before? In Luke's version of the first Easter morning, it says, "Early in the morning, the women took the spices they'd prepared and went to the tomb. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb, but when they entered, they didn't find the body of the Lord Jesus. While they were wondering about this, suddenly two men in clothes that gleamed like lightning stood beside them. In their fright, the women bowed down with their faces to the ground, but the men said, 'Why do you look for the living among the dead?'" So the story of Jesus ascending into heaven, the ascension, saying goodbye to earthly life, has all the mystery and the wonder and raises just about as many questions for us as the resurrection. Jesus is passing from one way of being into another way of being. We don't necessarily understand it any better than his first followers did. Pretty weird. Hard to get our minds around. Jesus' disciples, like Elisha and like any of us, when change begins to happen, when we have to say goodbye to someone, we might prefer that time froze, that things stopped. We'd rather things stay still than face changes we don't want to happen. Sad things happen. People we love leave us. The hope and the comfort in these stories we heard this morning is there is life beyond the change. Life beyond grief and loss and the upset that comes. The hope is that God does not abandon us when we cross a bridge, move to a new place, begin the new chapter, get up the first morning after all has happened. Before Jesus left the disciples, he promised they would not be alone. He passed on the mantle, the cloak of leadership, and he told them, you're going to receive the Holy Spirit. And we're going to talk about that next week because it'll be Pentecost, and that's a day we remember the Spirit coming down and touching people's lives. It's a day we remember that we're never actually alone because God's Spirit is always with us. Last week I was talking about the Spirit a little bit. Talked about holy whispers, invitations from the Spirit to step outside of our comfort zone, to do something that is needed in the world, maybe something nobody else can do. And I offered the challenge or the encouragement to everybody to begin each day with a simple prayer. To get up in the morning and say, "Dear God, what do you want me to do? Is there something I'm meant to do today?" So did anybody do that this week? Anyone totally forget about it? It's okay. Well, You get up in the morning and you say, "Dear God, what do you want? What do you want me to do?" And then you spend the rest of your day listening for the answer. Listen for the holy whisper that says, "Here's a thing that maybe you don't want to do, but maybe you should." The idea is to open up our hearts, our imaginations to the possibility that God is actually with us. God actually has stuff in mind for us that maybe no one else can do. Maybe God's waiting to guide you across a bridge into a new promised land, into a new territory. So I heard a great story this week from someone in the congregation who heard a holy whisper and answered it. So Laura's going to tell her story.
So last Sunday's message about the holy whispers, it really spoke to my heart. And for some reason on Sunday night, I reached out to Darrow, and I had remembered the challenge, but not exactly what it was, and I had wanted to make that part of my morning devotional. So Monday morning, it was the same kind of routine: make the coffee, make the lunches, and in my quiet alone time, I recited the prayer that Darrow had suggested, and it was, "Dear God, what do you want me to do today?" And as I ended my devotional, I kind of said to myself, just be aware of that. It's one thing to say it, but now you have to kind of be aware of it. So it's just a typical Monday. The kids went to school and I went to work at the bank, and it seemed like just another usual, mundane kind of Monday. Until I got in my car at 3:30 to go home. I turned on the car and I started it, and the most dreaded light came on the dashboard, the engine light. And we all know the emotions that come with the engine light. I sat there kind of wondering, what am I going to do? Maybe swearing a little bit. My cell phone rang, and it was the school. And the ride I had arranged for the kids after school hadn't shown up, and it was an hour past pickup time, and the kids were still there. I thought, great, this is just what I need. So I called to get the car into the garage. I raced to the school to pick up the kids. Needless to say, they were not the happiest people I've seen to have been at school for an extra hour. So we made it to town, we dropped the car off at the garage, and we walked down to McDonald's for dinner. The whole time we were walking, and just even standing in McDonald's, my mind was just consumed of what am I facing? What does this engine light mean? What does that mean for our budget? Everything was kind of muddled up in my mind. The kids ordered their meals, I ordered mine, and I stood there waiting at the counter. And I wasn't really aware of what was happening until I heard a young boy next to me order a small fry and a water. And when the girl at the counter said the order was just over $2, he looked at the coins he had in his hand and said, I guess I'll just get the water. He didn't have the money to pay for the small fry. I don't know what happened, but before I knew it, my wallet was open, and I told the boy, just order your dinner. And at first he kind of was like, no, it's fine. And I think when he saw that I wasn't giving in, he finally ordered his meal. And we just stood there at the counter waiting for our food to come. And it wasn't until I had got my tray and I turned to walk away that he tapped me on the shoulder and he said, I can't believe you did that for me. And all I could say was, you deserve that. Because you do. You deserve to have a meal at the end of the day and to know that we're all in this together. That's kind of what I wanted him to see. So in the midst of ordering and everything, the kids had gone and picked out their seats. So I had taken the tray and sat it down, and the kids were getting their food. And Lucas says to Kira, this is going to make me cry, Mommy bought somebody's meal, and then the man cried. And I didn't notice he had cried, but more importantly, I didn't notice that Luca was watching. So it sparked a conversation between the three of us of why you do these things, because that is somebody's little boy. That's somebody's son that needed a meal, and I just happened to be where I needed to be. So that was just my story I wanted to share.
Amen. Thank you, Laura.